Okay, everybody, welcome. This is Pete LaBarbera. This is the Americans for Truth Hour, and or Americans for Truth Live, I should say. And welcome back. This is our 4th episode, so we're still working through stuff here, but we appreciate it so much that you're watching. We're on every day, noon Central Time. I'm out of Chicago right now. My friend Mike Heath is driving, so driving to the March for Life in D.C., which is a credit to him and his family. But our group is Americans for Truth about homosexuality, and basically that's our mission: tell the truth about homosexuality in a culture filled with lies. And I'm just loving the show so far. I hope you are. It's so good to have the freedom to discuss these issues without worrying about politically correct reactions all the time. And as Mike and I talked about, basically our mission is going to be to help raise consciousness on this issue. And there's a lot of things we want to discuss. Today, we're going to be talking about the LGBT queer attack, assault, Saul Alinsky assault on Mike Pence and his family. It's just incredible what's going on. It's like an all-out political war on Mike Pence and his family. His wife is a target. His daughter is a target. It doesn't matter, because Mike Pence is the symbol of the representation of all that is evil, if you listen to the left, and they're getting nasty and always seem to be getting nastier. But first, some admin stuff here, guys. I never mentioned that I am a family man. I've got 5 wonderful kids. My wonderful wife, Christina. We've been married 30 years. I get asked all the time, so, well, why are you doing this issue? Were you gay? Are you ex-gay? No, that wasn't one of my sin issues. I never struggled with it. I'm not gay, although I do have the distinction of probably being the straight guy who's been accused of being gay more than any other straight guy on earth, which is sort of strange. But the way it works is homosexual activists believe that if you're opposing them, there must be some deep-seated root of, I don't know, homoeroticness or whatever. But they basically accuse you of being what they are, and that's a bad thing, yet they do it. It's some sort of weird self-hatred at work there. I don't know what it is, but I'm not gay, never was gay. I don't believe anybody really is gay in the sense that that's the core, the essence of of who they are. As we've talked about already on the show, homosexuality in our mind is about behavior. It's what you do. It's not who you are. Therefore, it's a behavior that you can leave. It never should define a person. No sin should define a person. And ultimately, we hope that you, as a listener, and even if you struggle with homosexuality, that one day you will define yourself through Christ, with your relationship to God, rather than by a sin. Some more administrative stuff. Twitter, my website, my Twitter page is Peter LaBarbera. That's PeterLabarbera. You'll get a lot of stuff there. The show is immediately up there, a lot of times faster than even on the website. I don't know how long that's going to last, Mike. Twitter page is right there on the screen. Go there, sign up, follow us. We've got a donate button on the website. Mike will talk about that later on in the show. And what else do we got? When I say, we're free and on the show, the problem with this issue, of course, is that everybody's running scared. They're always thinking, even a lot of Christians are like, well, can I say this? And they're thinking about the culture, and they circumscribe what they can say, or even sometimes think about this issue based on the world. And so what happens is the world ends up driving this issue rather than the truth. And our aim is to turn that around. And so, it's okay to be anti-gay. If you're talking about anti-gay behavior, the idea that people are defined by a sin, it's not okay to hate people. People are made in the image of God. And so we love people. People struggle with sin. That's the reality of it. People deserve respect, and you want to reach out to people with the love of Christ, but homosexuality doesn't deserve any respect. It doesn't deserve respect because it's the essence of a sin. It's a sin movement. And so the problem is people end up respecting homosexuality rather than respecting people made in the image of God, who we want to reach out to in the love of Christ. And so there's that whole hate thing. But what's happening in our movement in this world is the left the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer movement, and they call themselves queer now, they're saying that if you oppose them, in other words, even if you oppose the behavior, you're a hater, you're a bigot, you're a homophobe, you're a transphobe, and go down the list. And so that's a conflation that they do, and they do it intentionally, and they're doing it to Mike Pence in a very wicked way. But first of all, Jared, could you pull up I want to do a little clarification or a little bit more discussion of Kai Feldblum, who we talked about yesterday. Senator Mike Lee, Utah Republican, put a hold on the nomination of Kai Feldblum as an EEOC commissioner. That's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And lo and behold, we actually won, and she resigned, and she's off the EEOC, which is a good thing because Kai Feldblum is an open lesbian activist. She's a radical LGBTQ activist. And, why should a radical activist be appointed to a federal agency under a Republican administration? But when I said there's a backstory yesterday on this, and by the way, the number, Jared, I don't know if you have it on the screen, but to call Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee, and thank him, I'd encourage all of you to do that. His number is 202, his number in Washington, Senator Mike Lee, 202-224-5444. And I called up his office and I said, hey, thank you. Thank you for standing up for religious liberty. Thank you for standing up for truth and taking a stand. And they appreciated it when I called. So call Senator Mike Lee's office and do that. But Mike, we talked about the backstory, and it turns out there's a very tragic backstory with Mike's in the car there, so you're going to get some little extra noise. Hey, Mike, can you mute for 1 second while I read some of this from the story? Because we're getting a lot of back noise there. Jared, okay, let's pull up that story. This is Kai Feldblum, and it turns out she was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home. She was even going to be studying. She was going to be study to be a Talmudic scholar. But then her mother died when she was a teenager. Her mother died in a car accident. And there's a part in this story, Jared, if you could pull it up, where she talks about how she was in college and she was singing a prayer. And the prayer was, who shall live and who shall die? And she thought back to her mother's accident. And here's what she says in the story. This is the Washington Jewish Weekly. Washington Jewish Week, I'm sorry. And her quote was, in a flash of a moment, I just decided I did not believe. If God decides everything, why was her mother no longer alive? She wondered. And then she becomes ultimately, so she doesn't believe in God anymore because this tragedy happened. And it's just such a sad story when people give up on God because something awful happens in their life. And do we have all the answers to why these things happen? No, we don't. And but Kai Feldblum basically gave up on God. She ends up, she goes on to say, the story says she slowly entered the secular world and met some, quote, radical women who finally gave me the name for what she was thinking through in high school. And that's how she, quote, realized she was gay. Now, note the word choice, realize. In other words, she was gay all along, according to the liberal thinking. She was gay and she realized who she was. Now, I'm going to be so bold to say is if her mother hadn't died, perhaps, maybe she wouldn't have, quote, realized this is who she was. Maybe she still would have struggled with homosexuality, maybe not. But surely this terrible tragedy influenced her. It influenced the course of her life. And now she basically still practices a form of Judaism, but she's an atheist. In other words, she's practicing the cultural aspects of Judaism, but she's given up on God, and it's very sad. And I would encourage, if you're a prayer out there, you pray for people, pray for Kai Feldblum, pray that she finds Jesus, pray that the Lord enters her life. It's a wonderful thing that's happening in this world now. We have people of a Jewish background, like I was married by one, Lon Solomon, who are finding Jesus Christ, who was Jewish, who came out of Judaism, Jesus Christ. The Old Testament to the New Testament. Dr. Michael Brown is another wonderful example. And so pray for Kai Feldblum that she, because her bigger problem is she's rejected God. And maybe that will help her to leave homosexuality behind. But she became a very radical and a very smart homosexual activist, open lesbian. And Mike Lee did the right thing, because she's not the type of appointee that should have been appointed under a Trump administration that says he wants to defend religious liberty, because she says that religious liberty and gay rights is a zero-sum game, and gays win, Christians lose. That was her philosophy. Okay, so Mike, I don't know, you want to give it another try?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes, there was a lot of background noise before.
Yeah, we got my wife Polly's in the back seat, and I've got my very dear friends Paul and Susan Medore from Maine, heroes from Lewiston, and Paul you can see on the screen here next to me. He can't hear. He can't hear us.
The Medores are heroes, that's for sure. So, what do you think about this backstory, Mike? Isn't it sad?
Yes, it's always sad when someone turns their back on God. I'm so glad, Peter, that you're taking up the issue of Kai Feldblum from that perspective. In other words, helping the listeners to think about the religious aspect of her activism and connecting that to her politics and to her leadership of the EEOC. So many Christians, good thinking Christians, won't do that. They won't connect the dot between religion, Christianity, especially in America, and politics. And we're not going to get to the other side of this mess unless we start being candid about that.
Mike, I'm going to do you one up. I'm going to say so many Christians, and also just thinking people, let's just say thinking conservatives or thinking moderates, don't make the connection between somebody's embrace of homosexuality as an identity and the tragedies that happen in their lives, especially when they were younger. It's become politically incorrect to say that. For example, Don Lemon, the CNN host, openly gay, he's one of the gay icons, even though he's pretty much hated by conservatives because he's so left wing and he says some really, far left things on the air. Don Lemon was molested as a child by a homosexual young adult, I believe. I don't know. I can't remember the age of the man. I think he was an older teenage man, molested Don Lemon when he was younger. And Don Lemon was a boy. He was in the neighborhood. And Don Lemon's mother was in an adulterous relationship with a businessman and would actually stay in the business. I mean, they would have their rendezvous apparently in the businessman's office because he had to be away from his wife. I mean, it was a terrible thing. But the idea that had no effect on Don Lemon's life, his later embrace of gayness and, oh, I'm openly gay and everything, I think is ludicrous. And yet it's become politically incorrect to say that.
Well, what's even worse is that they have managed to make it sound like and appear that the reason that they end up realizing that they're homosexual as a result of these tragedies is because of Christianity. It's because Christianity creates a false guilt, a guilt that isn't real, a guilt that isn't part of nature. And they've convinced even good Christian people to talk that way and unfortunately think that way. And we're even seeing Protestantism, evangelicalism start to play footsie with this idea that that Christianity creates a kind of guilt which is toxic.
Right.
And then when people experience, like Lemon, when they experience this tragedy, if Christianity weren't there, they wouldn't have the guilt, and that wouldn't, there wouldn't.
Right. In other words, we're to blame. Society's to blame, and that goes back to Isaiah 5:20. Good is evil, and evil is good. Rather than homosexuality being the sin, homophobia or homo hatred, as one gay activist called it, or transphobia. These things are the real sin. And so you see secular people who don't even believe in God. They really are echoing sin concepts, although they've flipped it. And we're the sinners, although they don't acknowledge sin. I mean, they if they're not, I mean, atheists sometimes, they're the LGBT movement in a way becomes like a cult. They're very religious like. I mean, they're very preachy. Let's face it. Only they've substituted real holiness, the holiness that comes from the Bible, and believing the Bible and obedience to the Bible. They've substituted their own absolutes, and this is why I call it homo fundamentalism. They're fundamentalists. I mean, come on. If you're against them, it's kind of, they have circular logic. You're anti-gay. You've committed. You're the sinner. although they don't, a lot of secular atheistic LGBT activists don't acknowledge sin itself. And, we talk on Twitter about it a lot. But it's just very interesting. But let's move on to Mike Pence. Okay, Jared, can you pull up the clip on Mike Pence? This is just unbelievable, folks. And it's so interesting on so many levels because it's a microcosm of what we're facing. Karen Pence went back to teach at a school called, I think it's Emmanuel Christian School. Is that right, Jared? Can you pull that up a little bit? It's in Springfield, Springfield, Virginia. And she had Emmanuel Christian School. It's affiliated with Emmanuel Bible Church, where I used to go. I believe this is the same school. I used to go to Emmanuel Bible Church in Springfield. Karen Pence used to teach there. She taught art. She went back to teach. And what became the headline? Oh, my goodness. She went to speak at an anti-LGBT school, a school that bans anybody LGBT from working there. What a horrible thing. She's a terrible person for doing this. Well, let's get to reality. It's a Christian school. They believe the Bible is the word of God. The Bible is clear that you cannot embrace any sexual activity outside of marriage. And marriage is not this newfangled weird thing between two people of the same sex. Marriage is one man, one woman. Okay. And so this Christian school believes the Bible. She went to work there. She's a Christian. Mike Pence is a Christian. The family's Christian. But how does the news focus it? Huffington Post did a story. Huffington Post is far left, extremely radical. They hate Trump. I think Huffington Post was so radical that when Trump announced for the presidency, they said they wouldn't even treat him as a serious contender. Arianna Huffington, who founded Huffington Post, acted like Trump could not even be treated from a serious news perspective. And so that's the Huffington Post. I think they were one of the first to do the story on Karen Pence. But here NBC News picks it up. And Mike, this is fascinating. Now, Jared, pull that up a little bit. Here's the headline: Karen Pence to teach. Go down a little bit, Jared. Let me read that. Karen Pence to teach at school that bans LGBTQ employees, students. And then you go down, and this story might as well have been written by a gay activist group like GLAAD, which used to be called the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. GLAAD is the leftist media group that makes sure everybody's in line with the pro-gay media line. So this story is so far left. Jared, pull up to the key quote I had there. There's one part in the story where they're talking about the Virginia. Here it goes. Okay. It talks about the employment application. You have to live a life of moral purity. And it basically is seeking to ensure that people who work at Emmanuel Christian School are faithful to the word of God. And then keep going, Jared, down that story. It says you can't engage here is not limited to such. Okay, you can't engage in heterosexual activity outside of marriage, premarital sex, cohabitation, extramarital sex, homosexual or lesbian sexual activity. Well, of all those sins, folks, guess which group is the one complaining? I didn't see fornicators saying, "Oh my goodness, Karen Pence is working at a school that bans fornicators." No, didn't see that. Didn't see the incest lobby come out. It was the homosexual lobby, of course, and the transgender lobby. They're the ones who said, and they frame it as she's working at a discriminatory school. And then go on, Jared. It goes on to Virginia itself. Okay, this is key. Now, this is really insidious. While the question, this is the NBC News, while the question of whether federal civil rights law prohibits employment discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity has been making its way through courts across the U.S., Virginia has no statewide legislation explicitly prohibiting this type of workplace discrimination by private employers. Now, what's fascinating about that is, yes, Virginia does not have a gay rights law or transgender rights law. The left is pushing for that in Virginia. But what's interesting is they don't even mention that usually under those laws, Christian schools would, in some states, would be exempted. Now, Mike, we've talked about, we don't like the exemptions being a big focus because that basically says only the Christians get to live out their morality. Mike, we're getting an echo there.
Can you turn that down?
so Virginia, but the law, the news article doesn't make any sense, any mention of that. These gay rights laws, as many homosexual activists talk about them, are not supposed to apply to, say, a Christian school, and yet the news is just treating it like, oh, it's another private employer, and there shouldn't be exemption. And so this ultimately, of course, homosexual activists are targeting and will target all institutions. And when they talk about this, the reason they're so upset is they just say, well, this is just religious-based bigotry. That's how homosexual activists see it. And so on one level, you have a discussion of exemptions. On the other hand, you have homosexual activists just talking about, hey, this is just another form of bigotry. So they treat people who oppose the homosexuals or transgender, openly transgender individuals. They say the idea that they can't work at a Christian school is bigotry, right, Mike? And so it all falls under bigotry. But even the news article didn't even mention that in some of these, even at the federal level, when they're talking about this, they're going to say, oh, but Christian schools would be exempt. But that's not even mentioned when it talks about the Virginia law. We cannot hear Mike. Okay, well, anyways, there he is.
Yeah, hi, sorry. This point you're making, Peter, started as a serious public debate in Maine in the late 1970s. The organization I led for 20 years was the only group to testify against the idea that this sin movement, homosexuality, should be recognized under law as a category that would make, in terms of jobs and housing, the 4 categories of discrimination law. And then it continued, and it ended up being a statewide ballot fight a couple times, and we stopped them, and then they ultimately bought their way to adding the phrase sexual orientation. The real potency of that campaign is to erode the thinking, the moral conviction of the public on sexuality outside of marriage. And because you get them talking about the idea that employers think about this when they're hiring people. And that was never the case. That was always a lie. People, if people kept it to themselves, even all the way back to the beginning, I used to say all the way back to the beginning of Maine being founded in 1820, people didn't care. 2 women could live in a Maine village, and as long as they kept it to themselves, they could be employed and they could live in the village. But it's when they make it public and they want to talk about it and they want it to be something that's approved of, that it becomes an issue. And it's still an issue today, even though, look at this. Look at what's happening.
But here's what's fascinating about this is a Christian school. So
right.
The consensus, even if you go to a lot of homosexual activists, that would be exempted. And so they're willing to grant the exemption for now because they know that's the only way they're going to get the law. But ultimately, they go after those institutions anyway. But
right.
Look at the Boy Scouts. When the Boy Scouts, the genesis of the gay lawsuit against the Boy Scouts of America was a New Jersey sexual orientation law, which I guarantee you, if you go back to that debate on the floor of the New Jersey legislature, you would not have seen any discussion about the Boy Scouts being the target. But they were targeted as a public accommodation. They ultimately won at the Supreme Court. They won their right to hire people by their own code, their own moral code, being morally straight. They won by 5-4, but then they were still vilified and attacked by the left, and ultimately they conceded. And so what you see here with this story is the homosexual lobby is always on offense, and they want to get people thinking only in terms of from a discrimination perspective. But before we lose, since time is running out, I want to move on to the larger, another point here with the Mike Pence. Mike Pence, since he joined the Trump ticket, has been used in a Saul Alinskyite way by the LGBT lobby. He becomes the focus of all that is from what they're trying to say, everything that's bad. They've used Mike Pence as the target of Mike Pence it's the war on the Pence family as a symbol of the war on evangelical Christians. And what pull up the Saul Alinsky, you've got Rules for Radicals, go to number 13. This is what's happening, folks. Number 13 is isolate the target. Okay, these are Saul Alinsky, who was the wicked Chicago activist who Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton both, use his tactics. Well, here's number 13 of his evil Rules for Radicals, folks. Number 13. This is how to beat conservatives, how the left will achieve its goals. Number 13, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Cut off the support network and isolate the target from sympathy. Go after people and not institutions. People hurt faster than institutions. And so Mike Pence and his family becomes the target, and he is the symbol of conservative Christianity. And so what have they done? Pull up one of the dance parties. I have a video there. When Mike Pence moved to DC to be vice president, he had to live temporarily in housing in Northwest DC. And so what did the gay lobby do? They started doing dance parties. Now, if you have young children, you want them to watch this video that we're about to air. They had dance parties where they would basically, do a protest. They would do a protest at Mike Pence's temporary DC home, just to basically harass him. And you here, play the video, Mike, Jared. Okay, what this is a wild protest, including a man, and it was hard to see there. Okay, there's a big sign. A man gyrating like as if he was on a float in a gay pride parade, lascivious gyrating in front of, directly in front of the street in front of Mike Pence's temporary house in DC. And then later on, I was walking in the neighborhood. We took pictures. They had people hanging rainbow flags throughout the neighborhood. Anybody who was sympathetic, somehow LGBT became the symbol of opposition to Trump, and they used Pence as a target to attack Trump. And it goes on. Then Mike Pence's daughter, his daughter name is Charlotte, wrote a book, a children's book. So what did John Oliver do? The late night host, he spoofed the book by making one with a gay themed character, So somehow homosexuality and homosexuality activists and transgender activists, they're in the vanguard of the attack on Christianity itself. And I want you as Christians watching this show to understand that. Why is it that news articles look these days like they're written by gay activists? In fact, a lot of times you can't even tell the difference between a GLAAD press release and a Huffington Post story and an NBC News story. And the reason is because they are picking up on the gay talking points, and they cover these protests more than they ever would cover a conservative protest. And it's because they're using the gay lobby to attack the Trump administration through Mike Pence, and at the same time, they're smearing Christians. And we'll talk more about this tomorrow. We're at the end here. But Mike, if you got any thoughts, take us out.
Jared, go ahead and throw up the donate page. It's important, listeners, to check out the excellent AmericansForTruth.com website and click on that donate page and make a donation to Americans for Truth, because without financial support, of course, we can't pay the bills and get the show out there. We're already pleased. We're only on the 4th show, and it looks, Pete, like we're getting hundreds, if not thousands, of visitors already, and we haven't even started to really push it onto the internet. But it's there. It's archived. It's on the website. Everything's there. AmericansForTruth.com.
Thank you so much. And come back tomorrow, noon Central Time, folks.